I was asking you about your artist work and your activist work, and then also the work that you do at the IGDS at the St. Augustine unit. What's the connection?
It's always a challenge to combine artistic and creative work and institution building and scholarly output. And they're not necessarily always compatible. And in fact, in the first years that I was at the IGDS, I was hosting New Voices with Attila Springer and Mohammed Muwakil. I was still in the Ten Sisters poetry movement. I was making If I Was Prime Minister videos. I was, engaging in a lot more free creativity. And I find there's a lot less time for that now. The one space that I have now for creativity is my diary, my online diary, Diary of a Mothering Worker, which is excerpted in the Guardian, Trinidad Guardian. And I really love that space because unlike a column that has to be about social issues, a diary doesn't have to be about anything except for what I'm feeling. And that's amazingly, some days it's stories, some days it's about, so it's the identity that it's about claiming the identity that Caribbean women have always had as workers, really destabilizing the idea that Caribbean women and Indian women were ever just housewives, whether you were working in the home, outside the home, you were working, you were laboring, and that has been an important way that Caribbean women have helped shape the society. That's the first thing. And then the question of mothering. The relationship of Caribbean women to mothering has been one that's fraught with tensions. On the one hand, it's a site of power, but on the other hand, it's been a site of disempowerment, impoverishment, violence, lack of recognition of their labor, and so on. And also, in the feminist movement, we have to perform our jobs. We have to participate in community organizing. We sort of are being pulled away from our family, right, for one reason or another all the time. And I wanted to claim the space of being able to say no, whether it's to work or to activism, because the emotional life of women and of love and of family is something that that is valid and that feminism has fought to be valid, but we've never really succeeded in having be validated. And so I wanted that identity of mothering, the work of mothering, the love of mothering, to be seen as informing women's identities, but not in stereotypical ways.
Okay, thank you very much, Gabby. It's been a pleasure talking mothering, love, work with you and learning a bit more about your own history in activism.
The emotional frustration I'm feeling. Some days it's about joy, some days it's about love, some days it's about politics, some days it's about feminism. And to have that space in a public newspaper, I'm not sure why anybody would read the diary, frankly. But to have that space in the public newspaper, for me, is the only creative space that I really have the time for. When I was making If I Was Prime Minister videos, each of those videos, although 5 minutes, would take 25 hours to make. And when you have a baby and a job and, considerations around publications, making those things kind of just seems like an indulgence. So that diary space is really the most creative space I have right now. But I think that the other creative space is with my students and their activism. So when my students for their popular actions are lying down in front of KFC and getting students to lie down in front of KFC to mark the numbers of women who've been killed that year in domestic violence, so that you see the chalk marks of their bodies and you're able to say, look, these are the fallen women. When they're doing popular actions that involve theater, popular theater, games. So in encouraging them to use creativity in order to engage in culture jamming and social consciousness raising and change, that's the other side for real creativity that I have.
Are you seeing any differences in terms of the challenges and the modes of engagement from when you started out in your early 20s in youth movements and the kind of work that your students are doing now?
when I was a student, I felt like I had a lot more time for activism than students seem to have now, and for follow-through than students seem to have now. And I'm no longer in the youth movement because I think that you should get out of the movement when you stop officially being a youth, as defined in the UN. So I can't speak about the youth movement, but I do know that for me, when I was involved in youth movement, I think it was a lot either easier or we were able to secure a lot more visibility for the kinds of issues we were involved in than I see young activist youth having now in terms of media space. At the same time, you know, when I was in the youth movement in the first decade of the 2000s, in comparison to now, there are also far more blogs that are being done, online blogs by young women primarily, and one or two by young men around the region. And I think that those online blogs are an incredibly important resource for documenting where young women's head is at now. And I think in a decade, having that resource now will be a real treasure of information, ideas, passion, activism, networking, and so on, outside of traditional media spaces, which has its opportunities and its limitations. And so for me, those online networks are something that are extremely powerful and which didn't exist in the youth movement at the time.
Okay, so just to close, now that we're talking about online, and to go back to your own blog a bit, Diary of a Mothering Worker, explain to me Mothering Worker, what is that? Why did you specifically choose that title?
Diary of a Mothering Worker was started because I identify strongly as a woman who likes to work and who has to work and who was brought up by a mother who always worked, and with the idea of Caribbean women as always being workers. As I tell my students, the majority of women who came to the Caribbean came as independent workers. They may have been enslaved, they may have been indentured, but they were workers. And so rather than being a working mom, I wanted to situate Caribbean women squarely in terms of the productive sphere and what that has meant in terms of their own self-sufficiency, what has that meant in terms of their ability to raise their children on their own if they have to, and what that's meant in terms of their identity.